Hey guys, this is the MMA Breakdown back with predictions for UFC on Fox 19, Nurmagomedov versus Ferguson. As always, starting with my recap for the previous event, UFC Fight Night 85 Hunt versus Mir, 7-12 for the event, 5,777 overall for the event, and then that got me to 3,042. Not sure if that was above or below my ranking before the event, because it was very close. I know I was 3,000 something. Alright, I'll just scroll through my picks here. Dan Kelly versus Antonio Carlos Jr. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen in the UFC. Definitely one of the biggest upsets ever, I think. And I thought I was totally robbed on the Rin Nakai fight. She looked really bad on the feet. She was definitely getting beat up there, but she won the second round big, and then the third round she was getting outstruck again, but got the takedown, and I thought that won her the round. I was pretty bummed about that. Let me know what you guys think. Alright, so that's it. Okay, guys. Alright, so UFC on Fox 19, Nurmagomedov versus Ferguson. I'm really excited for this card. Top to bottom, it's pretty much all really good fights, good matchups. I think there are going to be a lot of finishes on this card, so I'm really looking forward to it. Some of the Fox cards that have had title fights, those kind of feel like sometimes that the UFC is really trying to make something really big out of those, and they end up being kind of overwhelming. I think these Fox cards where we have a really great contender fight headlining, this just kind of feels better. You have lower expectations, and they fill the card with a bunch of other fun fights. I kind of like this better than maybe some of the more recent fight night cards that have had title fights headlining, like Dillashaw versus Brow 2, and even Cruz versus Dillashaw, which was on FS1. So looking forward to this card, and also this whole stretch of, I think, 3 or 4 weeks straight with an event every week. I'm kind of looking forward to this. At least the headliners are really good. If you think back to a year ago at this time, we got stuff like Crow Cop versus Gonzaga headlining, and Demetrius Johnson versus Kyoji Horiguchi. None of that this time around. This card is really good. Rothwell versus Dos Santos for a Fight Pass card. I think that's going to be fun, and at least the main event is pretty fun. And Cormier versus Jones 2, the pay-per-view at the end of the month. So I like this little stretch, and leading up all the way to UFC 200. Early summer looks great. Just a really several month-long stretch of fun UFC events and strong headliners, at least. So you guys know me and how down I am usually when there's a stretch where the UFC is running a ton of events and a bunch of fight night cards with sometimes weak headliners or just a lot of filler, but I'm kind of looking forward to this stretch up to UFC 200. I think it's going to be pretty fun. All right, let's just get started. So on the UFC Fight Pass prelim card, starting off at welterweight, Alizu Zaleski dos Santos versus Omari Akhmedov. Omari Akhmedov has been in the UFC for several years. Zaleski dos Santos just coming off of his debut loss to Nicholas Dalby. I think a lot of people are going to favor Akhmedov here, just given his UFC experience, and he's picked up a few wins. Vets like Brian Ebersol, and then some pretty much bottom of the barrel guys. Mats Nilsson, Thiago Perpetuo, and losses to Gunnar Nelson and lost to Sergio Moraes last time out. He's been improving fight to fight, though. I think his striking has looked a lot better fight to fight. He looks smoother on the feet. We saw some good leg kicks in the Ebersol fight. He's a Dagestani fighter, so it's kind of a bit rough on the feet, but mixes in that wrestling, and he's a bit of a brawler. But he looks like he's sharpening up his technique. But at least Zaleski dos Santos, he fought Nicholas Dalby in his debut, and the fight was reasonably competitive. I think in the end it was clear he got outpointed. But Dalby's a pretty good kickboxer, and I think a skilled kickboxer. So for him to be reasonably competitive against him, the fight went to a split decision, which he lost. That makes me have to take him here against Omar Akhmedov. I don't think Akhmedov, he's fought anyone with the striking that Zaleski showed against Dalby. And, Zaleski was taken down several times by Dalby, and Akhmedov, he likes to rush in on your legs, try to get you up against the fence. So he might be able to expose that. I don't feel confident, greatly confident in picking Dos Santos, but I just think he's going to be too comfortable, too skilled a striker for Omar Akhmedov. So I'm going to take Dos Santos there. All right, next up at lightweight, Drew Dober versus Islam Makhachev. This is, I think, a tougher fight than it might appear on the surface. I think Makhachev definitely deserves to be the favorite, and has really high potential. We saw that in his debut fight against Leo Kuntz. Landed a good flurry on the feet, took him down, and very easily took the back and submitted him. His last fight got knocked out by Adriano Martins, but that to me really doesn't affect how I see him as a prospect. I mean, Martins is a really underrated fighter with really good boxing and power. So I don't knock Makhachev for that at all. Drew Dober, not really a highly skilled fighter in any area, but he's tough, and he's big, and he showed in his last fight against Scott Holtzman. He's just a good enough kickboxer, just good enough with the grappling and the wrestling to edge someone who maybe isn't as experienced as him. He's inconsistent himself. Against Efrain Escudero, just completely fell apart. He slipped right as soon as the fight started. Escudero was able to choke him out from there. And the fight against Leandro Silva, he was losing early. Seemed like he was about to turn the tide there. And then he had an okay performance against Nick Hein. I just think Makhachev, given his finishing ability, that's going to be enough for me to take him here. I think it could be the case that Dober is a little too seasoned. He can milk rounds, force the grappling and make this a war of attrition and get the win. And he's a decent kickboxer himself, but Makhachev should just have a much higher ceiling, and that's why I'm taking him here. But it's a bit of a coin flip for me. It's a close fight. I'm going to take Makhachev though, and Drew Dober's the only finish he got in the UFC was against Jamie Varner, and I can't really give him credit for that because Varner knocked himself out going for his own takedown. So Makhachev just seems like he's the guy who has more finishing ability, so I'm going to go with Makhachev. All right, next up at middleweight, Cesar Ferreira versus Cal Magalhaes. Ferreira just doesn't have the chin to hang in the UFC. Has suffered 3 brutal knockouts at this point at the hands of Dalloway, Sam Alvey in his last fight, Jorge Masvidal, and he's not a bad fighter. He's a guy who's actually really high on coming off of tough Brazil 1 and winning the show. Can bust out really unorthodox moves. He has a good guillotine choke and has some good takedowns as well. And even in the Alvey fight, you saw he was really picking him apart from range early, but he just has such a bad chin. He's been knocked out several times now. I think anyone who connects on him is probably going to put him out. And Cal Magalhaes, that's exactly what he does. He has 2 almost identical wins against Trevor Smith and Luke Zacharich, where he just blitzed them right from the opening bell, threw caution to the wind and just threw bombs on them and just put them both out. I don't think he's going to do well against more well-rounded guys. We saw Josh Salmon in his last fight really kind of beat him up and took the back standing and choked him out. And Ferreira he is more well-rounded, has those skills, but I don't think he can hang on long enough. I think Magalhaes knows what he has to do. He's going to blitz him, go for broke early, and get the knockout. So I'm going with Magalhaes by first-round knockout. All right, next up at welterweight, Randy Brown versus Michael Graves. Randy Brown, I think a lot of people are going to take him here. I expect him to be the favorite, but I wasn't too high on him after his win over Matt Dwyer. I guess he's Sage Northcutt number 2. I think they picked him up from Dana White's show looking for a fight, and early against Dwyer. I think he struggled with the size of Dwyer and was getting bullied a bit in the clinch. And I think he was taken down maybe in that fight. I can't remember. But, after the first round, he turned it up and you saw more of his athleticism and his grappling. I think he took Dwyer's back standing at one point. But I don't know. I'm just not sold on him as a great prospect. Definitely has some ability, but had a bit of a tough time early with Dwyer. And Michael Graves, a guy who on Tough, I just didn't think any of him. He had 2 really uneventful fights, lost both of them, and he just looked super hesitant, gun-shy against Kamaru Usman. And then I can't remember who the other guy he fought was, but just didn't have any sense of urgency, really didn't do anything in the fight, and didn't get beaten badly, but just was very hesitant. And then in his debut fight in the UFC, fought castmate Vicente Luque and totally overwhelmed him and outworked him, was hitting takedowns really easily and outworked him, had a pretty good, well-rounded game, looked like a completely different fighter, and we saw how sharp Vicente Luque was in his next fight against Hayder Hassan, and his striking looked really good, cornered Hassan and submitted him easily, so for that, given that performance, that kind of bumps up Michael Graves in my eyes. So, and Vicente Luque was a guy who I thought was talented and showed it on Tough. So I like Michael Graves here. He just looked more solid, had a well-rounded game, whereas Randy Brown seemed like he was just trying to, kind of experience what it's like to be in the big show, and he just seemed to kind of be lost out there a little bit, he was fishing for something that could work, but Michael Graves really stuck to a game plan, hit those nice takedowns. I like him to get a decision here. All right, next up at welterweight, Court McGee versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. Really looking forward to this one. Both guys have a common opponent in Ryan LaFleur. McGee's fight was actually a lot more competitive than Ponzinibbio's fight. That fight, I think, went to a split decision, the McGee-LaFleur fight, and there were back and forth scrambles, and it was back and forth on the feet, whereas Ponzinibbio just kind of got taken down at will and had one point in the fight where he tagged LaFleur and had him on the ropes, but couldn't finish him. But I don't think those fights are going to be indicative of the matchup here. Court McGee is underrated, maybe a bit inconsistent. We've seen him get outstruck badly by guys like, maybe only by Costa Philippou, and then he won his fight against Robert Whittaker, and that fight took place on the feet for the entirety of the match. So he's not a bad striker, but Ponzinibbio, this guy's a killer, and he's been an absolute baller, just taking guys out violently. His last fight against Andreas Stahl, big, violent, crisp combinations, really dangerous striker, and when he has you hurt, he just jumps on you. Got an early knockout against Wendell Oliveira as well, and really good pressure and aggression, but not reckless. Never really leaves himself too wide open. Did get finished by Larkin, but I think that was more of he was just at a speed disadvantage. You know, wasn't really a huge skill gap in that fight, and he was competitive early. So I really like Ponzinibbio, a really capable finisher, and really has some very violent, aggressive combinations. And I just don't think McGee, even though he's hung with guys like Whitaker on the feet, I don't think he can deal with that kind of pace, that kind of trading in the pocket. So I like Ponzinibbio to overwhelm him here. I don't think McGee is a good enough wrestler to just take this guy down and win on takedowns. McGee was coming off of a long layoff in his last fight against Marcio Alexandre Jr. And early he was getting outstruck, managed to get it to the fence though and work the takedowns, won the fight, but I think he looked like he lost a step athletically, and Ponzinibbio I just think is going to swarm him and get a TKO, maybe first or second round. All right, next up, onto the Fox prelim card at women's bantamweight, Bethe Correia versus Raquel Pennington. Kind of another tough matchup to call, but I like Pennington here. Bethe Correia, I think she's just been pumped up by the media and fans. She never deserved that fight with Rousey, and it showed in that fight. And she just doesn't have a big win. I mean, who's her biggest win? Shayna Baszler. That's probably one of the lowest ranked fighters in women's bantamweight. And she had a decision win over Jessamine Duke, which she was in total control for that fight, but that might have been one of Jessamine Duke's least dominant losses in her career. I mean, she's been finished by everyone, and I think just got finished in Invicta. Even Bethe Correia's first fight against Julie Kedzie I thought was razor close, and I didn't think she won. Whereas Pennington shows that she's a real opportunist. She can just create moments of chaos, and she can create an opportunity to finish out of nowhere. She did that in her last fight against Andrade, redeemed herself from her loss in their first fight. And the Ashley Evans Smith fight, was getting out wrestled early, but managed to create a finish right at the end of the round. And other than the Andrade loss, which she just redeemed herself from, her only other loss in the UFC is against Holly Holm. And that was a really close, uneventful fight where she didn't really get beaten badly, and it was a split decision. So I'm taking Pennington here. I just think she's going to be able to push and push until she finds something that works against Correia. We haven't seen anyone really bite down and brawl against Correia except for Rousey, who destroyed her. So I like Pennington here. She doesn't do well, when the fight, starts to play out, and over several rounds, she doesn't have much of a really like a wrestling game or a good solid fundamental striking game to fall back on. Like you saw that in the Andrade fight, and the Holly Holm fight. But I think she's really going to go for the finish against Correia and find something that works. So I'm going to take Pennington here. All right, next up at bantamweight, John Dodson versus Manny Gamburyan. Not much to say here. This is one of those fights that I don't know why they're making this. I mean, it's going to make John Dodson look good, but it's a fight that I don't think should have even been sanctioned. I think Dodson's going to absolutely destroy Manny Gamburyan without any difficulty at all. Gamburyan has just been on the decline. Got dropped like 2 or 3 times by Cody Gibson's jabs before he managed to create a scramble and get the submission. I didn't even think he looked that good against Jorgensen in his last fight. I remember thinking that he lost that fight. And he's a guy who really can't strike, especially at range with guys anymore. He really relies on fighting in the clinch, trying to take them down against the cage. And John Dodson, obviously, I think is just way too athletic and fast for that. Although Dodson, after that layoff, did not look good against Makovsky. I actually thought he lost that fight, and then lost to Demetrius Johnson for a second time. But moving back up to bantamweight, and really never had a reason to left. I mean, he left after winning tough, after knocking out the current or the former champion TJ Dillashaw to win tough, and then immediately dropped to flyweight. Really never had a reason to move down. That's enough time spent on this fight. I think Dodson is going to absolutely roll over him. Manny Gamburyan is my Dan Kelly of this fight card, who I said was going to get destroyed by Carlos Jr. on the Hunt versus Mir card, and that obviously wasn't the case. It was the other way around, but yeah, I'm giving him zero chance to win this. All right, next up at featherweight, Cub Swanson versus Hakron Diaz. This is really an interesting one. It's a crossroads fight, definitely, for Cub Swanson. I think everyone is going to favor him here. And if this fight was even a year ago, even after the Edgar loss, I would have definitely taken Cub Swanson hands down, no doubt about it, and to win big against Diaz. But after those two very dominant losses, I just can't help but think that those fights and the damage he took, especially in the, well, not so much the damage, but just mentally, that that really, those fights really had to take something out of him and really kind of shake his confidence and shake him mentally. And Hakron Diaz, I think, is the perfect guy to just spoil any plans that Swanson has to return to old form here and just get in a brawl and throw big shots and hoping his opponent falls down. Diaz is, I'm not saying he's a guy who I think is, on the fast track to a title shot or anything. Still a guy who's lost to Nick Lentz and had another bad loss. Who was it here? Ricardo. That wasn't a bad loss. The Ricardo Lamas fight was actually pretty close. He could have won that fight, but he's a guy who's really going to want to use his size, use his wrestling and grappling, try to take you down. And Cub Swanson really hasn't fought those kinds of guys. He's fought guys who were willing to stand and trade with him. And we even saw in the Seaver fight, he got taken down early, lost that first round, and Edgar totally dominated him with the wrestling. So a young athletic guy like Diaz, only a year younger than Swanson, but has way less tread on his tires. At this point, he's hungry. I think he's looking to move up. Swanson might be done. He talked about leaving MMA, I think, for boxing after the Edgar loss. I just think, it's the way that their careers are going, a case of trajectories here. And I think we might have seen the end of Swanson. I hope I'm wrong because, he's a very exciting fighter and he's got skills on the ground, on the feet. Again, a couple years ago, definitely would have taken Swanson, but I just think he's kind of falling off the cliff at this point. And, Hakron Diaz has a style that he hasn't really faced too much in the UFC, and it's not a style where, he's going to give Swanson a lot of room to open up and fight in make the fight a brawl. So I have to take Diaz here. If Swanson returns to old form, then, he should really be favored to win. But, yeah, I have to take Diaz. All right, next up, a lightweight, Beneil Dariush versus Michael Chiesa. Great matchup. It's a perfect time for both of these guys to be fighting each other. But I have to take Dariush, and pretty confidently here. Both guys, strong grapplers. Very different kinds of grapplers. I think Dariush is just going to be on a whole other level of skill and technique. Much more of a position-oriented guy, whereas Chiesa is more of a strongman grappler. Likes top position, can get in ground and pound from there. We saw that against Francisco Trinaldo, and he can. He's good at taking the back. That's what he did on Tough. To win a couple fights. That's how he beat Al Iaquinta, and has done that a few other times in the UFC, and did that against Jim Miller, which was really impressive. And Dariush did not beat Jim Miller, but the thing to really consider here is that Chiesa has found himself in bad positions in several fights where he could have easily been finished. Against Colton Smith, got his back taken early in the first round. and had to fight off a rear naked choke. Same thing against Jim Miller. Got his back taken, almost got choked out. Dariush didn't finish Miller, even though he was dominating for 3 rounds, but never in any moment of that fight was he ever in any trouble or even in a bad position. Didn't lose a second of that fight. And Dariush, has the jiu-jitsu grappling background, whereas Chiesa doesn't. I mean, he's a good grappler, but I mean, Dariush was a jiu-jitsu guy before MMA. I just have to take Dariush. Chiesa's found himself in, with his back taken one too many times for me to feel confident taking him here. And on the feet, I think Dariush might have the advantage. Chiesa striking. Neither guy's a good striker, but Chiesa, his striking's a lot less serviceable, I think. He got outstruck by Joe Lazon, and his striking just looks really stiff and awkward. And even against Mitch Clark, he was dominating him for 3 rounds, had his back many times, couldn't finish him. So Michael Chiesa is a good fighter, but I think Dariush is just going to be on another level of skill and technique on the mat. So I'm going to go with Dariush. I think he gets a submission almost as soon as the fight hits the floor. All right, on to the main card. Women's strawweight, Rose Namajunas versus Tecia Torres. I like Namajunas here. Tecia Torres wasn't too high on her on tough. Lost to Marcos. I didn't think she looked that good against Beck Rawlings. And lost to Carla Esparza. In the UFC, she's picked it up a little bit. But she hasn't really had that win where she's just... first of all, she hasn't had a finish, but also hasn't had a win where she just... really ran over anyone or even put a big beating on anyone. Dropped Magana, I think turned up the heat against Leibarger in her last fight, late in the fight in the 3rd round. But the fight against Hill, she just seemed unwilling to really work towards the finish, even though she was in total control. And she just never seems to really connect flush with any of her strikes. She has solid fundamental striking. She mixes in kicks with her combinations, has dropped a few of her opponents, like I just mentioned, but seems like she can't really fully connect to really cause any serious damage, fight-ending damage. And I don't know if it's her reach because she's a pretty short fighter, but that's one thing I noticed on Tough and seems to kind of really plague her in the UFC as well. And Namajunas, coming off of that amazing win over Paige Van Zandt, super dominant, outclassed her on the feet and with the grappling. Namajunas is a submission threat. She looked great on Tough in all of her wins, had dominant finishes. And on the feet, I think she's just going to have an advantage striking at distance here. She's going to really have a big reach advantage. And, I think she can pick apart Torres from range. She really looked bad against Esparza because her wrestling just isn't there. Torres has some good takedowns. Maybe she can, have an advantage there. But I see Namajunas really having the advantage striking at range. And I think she might be able to pull out a submission. She likes to go for wild stuff. She choked out Angela Hill, taking her back standing. I think she might be able to do something like that against Torres. So I like Namajunas here. I think it's a competitive fight early. I like Namajunas maybe for a 3rd round submission, I'm thinking. So, definitely going with Namajunas. All right, next up at middleweight, a fight that I just can't understand who would really be interested in this. Lyoto Machida versus Dan Henderson. Seems like the most random fight to me ever. The first time they fought, we were already thinking that both guys should probably retire at that point. This fight's taking place at middleweight. The first one took place at light heavyweight. That first fight pretty much sucked. Nothing really happened. Machida landed some kicks, some strikes at range. I think Hendo got a takedown. If anything, if anything's different, Machida in the wins that he's gotten at middleweight, he's looked great. Really opened up with his striking. He's more aggressive, which is something I always really felt like he should have done at light heavyweight. Dan Henderson, I think you could also say he has a bit of a speed advantage. Looked a little more comfortable on the feet. Really got to work early against Boach. Both guys have a speed advantage. Both guys have taken a ton of damage at this point. Henderson with the Mousasi knockout, the 2 Belfort knockouts, and Machida getting destroyed by Luke Rockhold. Looked great against Weidman, but took a beating there. And then also, I thought was winning early against Romero. I think maybe even won every round up until he got finished. But once Romero hit that takedown and started landing some ground and pound, it was absolutely over. So both guys have taken a ton of damage. Both guys should probably retire. I mean, I just feel like Machida, if he fights like he fought against Dalloway or Mousasi, really using those kicks from range and really letting his hands go, I don't think there's anything Dan Henderson can do. I mean, it seems like that would be a nightmare matchup for Henderson, who, is just a slow, plodding guy, just looking for that overhand. I mean, it seems like he would walk right into, a big counter from Machida and just get knocked out cold. But, the first fight, Machida wasn't that dominant. Henderson looked quicker against Boach. Maybe he can land a big right hand. Maybe he can work his way inside, get a takedown. If you want to take Henderson, I won't try to talk you out of it. I don't feel that confident. I mean, it seems like these old timers like Henderson and Mir, even after they have a couple of knockout losses at any point, they can just have a surprise performance where they just knock someone dead like he did against Boach. So, and also the Shogun fight, he took a ton of damage in both of them. I have to take Machida. It just seems like Henderson's just way too plodding, way too immobile, old and slow at this point to land that big right hand against someone like Machida. So I think Machida's the safe, logical pick, but who knows? If you want to take Henderson, if you feel like you have a good case for him, go ahead and do it. But just keep in mind, Machida was competitive with guys like Romero, not Rockhold, but Weidman, within the last year or two, whereas Henderson, he beat a completely shop-worn Shogun and Tim Boach. So, actually, I'm going to take Machida here, and I'm going to say you probably shouldn't take Henderson. All right, next out of light heavyweight, co-main event, Glover Teixeira versus Rashad Evans. No reason to really take Rashad Evans here. Teixeira, I thought he might have been done after the Jones loss, and then especially after the Phil Davis loss, where he just looked uninspired and got outworked. But then he really had an awesome performance against Ovince St. Preux, where he withstood all of the big strikes early, was able to get it to the ground, and from there just dominated him. And then had a finish over Patrick Cummins. Thought he ate too many shots from Cummins, and that didn't look good. He taking some shots from a wrestler, and he did get taken down a few times, but eventually was able to get the finish. He outlasted him and really overwhelmed him on the feet as the fight went on. But I don't think any of those concerns should come into play here against Evans. Evans just looked way too unathletic against Ryan Bader. And I would argue that the loss he had a couple years ago to Little Nog was far worse than his loss to Ryan Bader. And he came back after that to have a dominant performance against Chael Sonnen, who wasn't, probably an elite opponent, especially him moving up to light heavyweight. But you never really know with Rashad Evans. He's been very inconsistent over the years. But, Teixeira's been fighting the elite guys in that division. He's been looking good. His hands are looking better, and he's got takedowns, and he's a submission threat. I don't see what Evans can do here. At the very least, Teixeira wins a dominant decision, maybe finishes him. All right, and then the main event, lightweight, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. I think a lot of people are feeling like with Nurmagomedov's injury layoff that Ferguson, that given that Ferguson should be the favorite here, and Ferguson, he's really improved. A guy who came off of tough and has wins over Josh Thompson and Edson Barboza in his last couple of fights, and he's got that patented Mars choke that he has, the variation of the Dars choke, and just a guy who's super aggressive on the feet. Seems like he's always going for broke, but I think that is a horrible style to use against pretty much the best wrestler in the sport. Khabib Nurmagomedov absolutely dominated Rafael dos Anjos, the current champion, and we all know how great dos Anjos is. We all know how great of a wrestler Rafael dos Anjos is, and Nurmagomedov just totally shut him down. RDA didn't get a chance to breathe in that fight. And Tony Ferguson, we saw him struggle a little bit on the ground against Danny Castillo, a wrestler. And also on the feet, it's not like this guy's untouchable. I thought there were moments in the Castillo fight where he was getting outstruck. And we saw him get blasted and knocked down right at the opening bell against Abel Trujillo. What Ferguson is, he's a skilled guy on the ground, and he's a guy who wins on cardio, on aggression, and he throws everything at you, hoping that eventually you will tire out before he does, and he'll be able to overwhelm you. That's what he did to Edson Barboza, and he does it at the expense of losing on the scorecard until he gets the finish. Was getting outstruck by Barboza early in that fight, and was just diving on the ground, rolling, trying to get some rolling submission, and throwing everything he had at Barboza. Just total forward pressure, very reckless. And while that worked against Barboza, and while it's impressive that he was able to make that work, I don't see that working at all against Nurmagomedov. I think he's going to leave himself wide open for the takedown. He's a better striker, I think, than Nurmagomedov, but we've seen power from Nurmagomedov, stopped Thiago Tavares dead in his tracks. And that Dars choke, unless he has Nurmagomedov badly hurt, I don't see that working on the best wrestler in the sport. And I would also argue that the fight against Abel Trujillo, that was probably a bigger test for Nurmagomedov, because that's a guy who can crack you with one shot, just like he did to Ferguson and nearly finished him. Ferguson really has to put volume on you, and he goes for broke early because he knows that he can't rely on technique. He's not going to out-wrestle you for 3 rounds. He's not going to outstrike you from distance from 3 rounds, although he kind of did that to Thompson. But he absolutely relies on going for the finish, putting as much volume on you as you can. He fights to finish you, and I just think against really the best wrestler in the sport, that just isn't going to work. So I'm going to go with Nurmagomedov for a decision here. All right, guys. Those are my predictions for UFC on Fox 19, Nurmagomedov versus Ferguson. If you haven't checked out my predictions for UFC Zagreb, Rothwell versus Dos Santos yet, check that out. I'll leave the link in the description. Also, follow me on Twitter. I will leave the link to that in the description. All right, guys, next up is UFC 197, Cormier versus Jones 2. I'll be back soon with predictions for that. Take care, you guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.